It's strange how the truth sneaks up on you. It doesn't always come crashing through the front door like in movies. Sometimes, it's a whisper in the dark, a passing sentence, a careless murmur that wasn't meant for your ears. That's how I found out. I wasn't supposed to be home early that night. My boss let me off a few hours ahead of schedule, so I figured I'd surprise my wife, Corliss. We've been distant lately, like two strangers orbiting each other in the same house. I wanted to change that. I wanted to reconnect. As I stepped into the house, the lights were dim. At first, I thought she wasn't home, but then I heard her voice, low, hushed. She was on the phone. I don't make a habit of eavesdropping, but something in her tone stopped me cold. It wasn't the voice of a loving wife. It was dripping with frustration, with something close to disgust. I can't stand it anymore. I feel trapped. Being with him is suffocating. Her voice trailed off, but those words were enough. They were knives. I felt my breath hitch, my fingers tighten into fists. My first instinct was to march into the room and demand an explanation, but something told me to wait, to listen. She laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. I know, but it's not that easy. He's too decent. He won't fight me. He'll just walk away. My stomach dropped. Was that really how she saw me? Just a passive figure? Someone who wouldn't put up a fight? For a long moment, I stood there, caught between rage and disbelief. This was my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, and she saw me as an obstacle and inconvenience she was waiting to remove. I stepped back, slowly, quietly. I didn't want to hear more. I didn't want to know how deep her resentment ran. Instead of confronting her, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I packed a bag. Not a dramatic, movie-style meltdown. No throwing things into a suitcase with tears streaming down my face. No yelling. No final words. Just silent, methodical movements. Wallet. Keys. Clothes. I took one last look at the house, the life I thought was mine. Then, I walked out the door. I didn't tell her. I didn't slam the door for effect. I just left. And the real shock? She didn't even notice. Not until it was too late. I drove aimlessly for hours that night. I didn't have a destination. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to be anywhere but home. My mind was racing, replaying Corliss's words over and over again. I can't stand it anymore. Being with him is suffocating. He won't fight me. That last part hurt the most. It wasn't just that she wanted to leave me. It was the way she thought of me as weak, as someone who didn't matter enough to fight for. And maybe she was right in one way. I didn't fight her. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even tell her I was leaving. I just vanished. I found myself pulling into a roadside diner just outside of town. The neon lights flickered above me as I sat in my car, gripping the wheel. I wasn't even hungry, but I needed a place to think. Somewhere that wasn't my car, wasn't my house, wasn't the life I had just abandoned. Inside, the diner smelled like burnt coffee and old vinyl booths. It was mostly empty, aside from a tired-looking waitress wiping down the counter. I took a seat in the back, ordered a coffee, and stared at the steaming cup in front of me. My phone sat face up on the table, completely silent. No missed calls. No messages. She hadn't noticed. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach as the hours dragged on. How long would it take? An hour? 2? Surely, at some point, she'd wonder where I was. But as midnight came and went, my phone remained silent. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She really didn't care. I must have dozed off in the booth because the next thing I knew, my phone was buzzing violently on the table. I jolted awake, my heart pounding as I grabbed it. 1:43 a.m., Corliss. For a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the part where she realized what she'd said, where she called me in a panic, begging me to come home. Maybe this was the part where she felt even a fraction of the pain I felt. I answered, my voice groggy. Yeah. There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, where are you? Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Not even, I didn't mean what I said. Just a cold, flat, where are you? I exhaled slowly, running a hand down my face. Out. A pause. Then, I didn't realize you were gone. I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tighter. The words hit harder than I expected. She hadn't realized I was gone. I could have disappeared off the face of the earth, and she wouldn't have noticed until she needed something from me. Guess that says it all, I muttered. Eldric, come home. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Just a demand. Come home. Like I was a misplaced item, like I had inconvenienced her by leaving. I let out a bitter laugh. Why? So I can keep suffocating you? She was quiet, but I could hear her breathing. She wasn't expecting that. Maybe she thought I hadn't heard her, that her little confession to whoever was on the phone would stay buried. She started, but I cut her off. Don't bother lying, Corliss. I heard everything. Silence. Long, heavy silence. And then, a soft exhale. Not panic. Not guilt. Just resignation. Eldric, she said finally, her voice tired. Let's just talk. But I was done talking. I hung up, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The drive away from that diner felt different than when I first left my house. The weight pressing down on my chest wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was something else. Clarity. A bitter kind of freedom. Corliss had made it clear how she felt about me, but now she knew that I had hurt her. And her response? Not panic. Not regret. Just a tired, resigned request to talk. What was there to talk about? She had already said everything when she thought I wasn't listening. I pulled into a cheap roadside motel, the kind of place where the carpet smelled of mildew and the front desk clerk didn't care why you were there as long as you paid in cash. I didn't care either. I just needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't my car, somewhere that wasn't tainted by memories of us. Inside the room, I sat on the stiff mattress, staring at my phone. There were no more calls from Corliss. No texts. Just silence. I was waiting for something, some reaction, some proof that I meant more to her than just an afterthought. But nothing came. Hours passed. I dozed off with the phone in my hand, waking up every so often to check it, only to see the same blank screen staring back at me. My mind kept replaying the way she had spoken about me, the disgust in her voice, the way she laughed about how I wouldn't fight for her. Is that really how she saw me? Morning light crept in through the thin curtains when my phone finally buzzed. My heart jumped before I even looked at the screen. Corliss, we need to talk. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Not even, are you okay? Just another demand. Like I owed her something. I could have ignored her, blocked her, disappeared completely. But a part of me, some stubborn, masochistic part, wanted to hear what she had to say. Maybe I just wanted confirmation that she really didn't care. Maybe I wanted to see if she would finally be honest. So, like an idiot, I texted back. Me? Where? Her response came immediately. Corliss, home. Of course. She wanted me to come crawling back. Back to the house where she had laughed about me behind my back. Back to where she felt nothing but suffocation. I threw my phone on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Every rational part of me was screaming to let it go, to just walk away and never look back. But I couldn't, not yet. So I got in my car and drove. She was waiting for me when I got there, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. I expected anger, maybe frustration, but she just looked indifferent, like she was dealing with a minor inconvenience. I walked past her without a word, stepping into the house that used to feel like home but now just felt like a crime scene. I could still hear her voice in my head. I can't stand it anymore. Being with him is suffocating. She shut the door behind me, sighing. You didn't have to leave like that. I let out a dry laugh. Didn't I? Her jaw tightened. I was upset. I didn't mean it like that. I turned to her, finally meeting her eyes. Then how did you mean it? She didn't answer. Instead, she ran a hand through her hair, exhaling slowly. Look, Eldric, we've both been unhappy. I know you felt it too. I shook my head. I might have felt distance, yeah, but I didn't know you hated being with me. She flinched at that, but only for a second. I don't hate you, she muttered. But you don't love me either, I shot back. Silence. That was all the confirmation I needed. Something inside me settled then, like a final piece locking into place. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand explanations. I had my answer. I turned toward the stairs, heading for our bedroom. No, my bedroom. I needed to grab the last of my things. But as I stepped past her, she reached out and grabbed my wrist. Eldric, please, she whispered. I stopped, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine. For a brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the part where she told me she was wrong, where she fought for me. But instead, she said something that sent ice through my veins. You don't have to leave. I mean, we can figure something out. Figure something out? I pulled my hand free, stepping back to look at her, really look at her. Her face was blank, but her eyes looked calculating. And that's when I realized. She didn't care about losing me. She cared about losing stability. She wanted me to stay, not because she loved me, but because I was convenient. And that was worse than anything else she could have said. I stood there, staring at her like I was seeing her for the first time. We can figure something out? What did that even mean? I knew what she wasn't saying. She didn't want me, but she didn't want to be alone either. She didn't want to deal with the messy fallout of a real breakup, the financial headache, the questions from family and friends. She wanted me to stay because I was easy, reliable, predictable. And for years, I had been. I used to think marriage was about patience, about working through rough patches, about commitment even when things weren't perfect. But what I hadn't realized, what I had refused to acknowledge, was that I was the only one working through it. I took a deep breath, stepping back from her. What exactly do you mean by figure something out? My voice was calm, but inside, something was cracking. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I mean, we don't have to rush into anything. Maybe we take some time apart, but you don't have to leave like this. We could still, keep things normal for now. Normal. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. You mean, you want me to stick around while you figure out whether or not you actually want to leave? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. I just need time, she admitted, avoiding my gaze. Things have been stressful, and I don't want to make a mistake. I rubbed a hand over my face. Corliss, you already made a mistake. You just didn't expect me to hear it. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second, I saw something flash in her eyes, annoyance. Like I was being difficult. Like I was the one ruining things. I shook my head, stepping past her. I'm not doing this. Doing what? She snapped, her voice sharper now. Being an option, I said simply. I've spent years making excuses for why things fell off between us. Years trying to be a good husband, trying to fix things that I didn't even know were broken. But I'm done. You don't love me, and I refuse to be some backup plan while you figure out what you really want. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, come on, Eldric. You're being dramatic. That was it. That was the moment I felt every last bit of love I had for her shrivel up and die. Dramatic. Like I was overreacting to hearing my own wife say she couldn't stand being with me. I turned back to her, my voice calm, but firm. You're right about one thing, Corliss. I won't fight for you. Her expression shifted, just slightly. Maybe she thought I was about to cave, that I was admitting defeat. But that's not because I'm weak, I continued. It's because you're not worth fighting for. Her face twisted, her mouth opening like she was about to lash out, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked upstairs, grabbed the last of my things, and left. No slamming doors. No final words. Just gone. I spent the next few days in a strange limbo, staying at a cheap motel, trying to figure out what came next. The freedom I had felt that first night was still there, but so was something else. A hollow sort of grief. Not for her, but for the years I had wasted. It wasn't just that she didn't love me. It was that she had probably stopped loving me a long time ago, and I had been too blind to see it. Too willing to accept the little scraps of affection she threw my way. But the thing about walking away is that it's never really that simple. Because Corliss wasn't done with me yet. The text started small. Eldric, we should talk. Then, I don't understand why you're making this so final. Then, don't throw everything away over one stupid conversation. That last one made me laugh. I wasn't the one who threw everything away. For a while, I ignored her. I focused on work, on trying to remember what life felt like before I had built everything around her. But then she showed up at my motel. I had just gotten back from grabbing some takeout when I saw her car in the parking lot. She was leaning against it, arms crossed, looking impatient. I sighed. Here we go? Really, Corliss? I muttered as I approached. You wouldn't answer my texts, she said, like that justified her hunting me down. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, leaving it open just long enough for her to follow. She did, shutting the door behind her. She looked around the room, wrinkling her nose at the peeling wallpaper and old carpet. So this is where you've been hiding? Not hiding, I corrected. Just choosing peace. She exhaled, shifting her stance. Look, I know you're upset, but this doesn't have to be so extreme. I stared at her. Extreme? She gestured vaguely. The whole dramatic exit, the ignoring my messages, staying in this place. We can work this out. I tilted my head, genuinely curious. Corliss, what exactly do you think there is to work out? She hesitated, and for the first time, she looked nervous, like she had expected me to still be the same guy who would bend over backward to keep the peace. Finally, she sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. I don't want things to end like this, she admitted. And how do you want them to end? She didn't answer, because she didn't know. I leaned against the dresser, crossing my arms. Be honest, Corliss. If I had never heard you that night, would you have ever told me how you really felt? She looked away. That was answer enough. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she looked back at me. And what she said next, it nearly made me laugh in disbelief. You don't have to leave. We can adjust things. Make it work. I blinked. Adjust things. She exhaled, looking almost embarrassed. I just mean, maybe we can take a step back. Give each other space. But stay together. We have a good life, Eldric. Comfortable. There's no reason to throw that away just because emotions got in the way. She said it so casually. Like love was an outdated concept. Like comfort was enough. I ran a hand down my face. Let me get this straight. You want us to what? Be roommates. She shrugged. We work well together in other ways. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Corliss, do you even hear yourself? She looked frustrated now. I'm being realistic, Eldric. Not everyone needs some big, dramatic love story. We have a house, a life. I laughed. Actually laughed. You think I want to be stuck in a loveless, passionless marriage just because it's convenient? She flinched at the word loveless, but she didn't deny it. I shook my head, grabbing my keys from the dresser. I'd rather start over completely than stay in a dead marriage just because it's comfortable. She stared at me for a long time, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing control. Because I wasn't just walking away this time. I was never coming back. I walked past Corliss without another word, pushing open the door and stepping outside into the cool night air. My heart was pounding, but not from sadness. Not from regret. From something sharper, something more final. I was done. I heard her footsteps behind me, her voice sharp with frustration. Eldric, don't walk away from me. I turned, slowly, meeting her eyes. What exactly do you expect me to do, Corliss? Pretend like I didn't hear you say you can't stand being with me? Pretend that you didn't just offer me some watered-down version of a marriage just because it's easier than letting go? Her lips parted like she had something to say, but nothing came out. She didn't deny it. Because she knew. I exhaled, shaking my head. That's the difference between us. You were planning your escape for God knows how long. But the moment I make the decision for you, you suddenly want to negotiate. Her hands clenched into fists. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I snapped. You were waiting for me to figure it out, weren't you? You didn't have the guts to tell me yourself. You wanted me to pick up on the clues, to make it easier for you. And now that I have, now that I'm actually leaving, you realize you never had a plan for what comes next. I watched as her expression wavered, the first real flicker of doubt creeping in. I had always been the predictable one, the stable one, the one she could count on to stay. She had never truly considered what would happen if I was the one to leave first. And now she was panicking. She took a deep breath, her voice softer now. Eldric, I know I hurt you. She hesitated. I didn't mean for you to hear that. I let out a bitter laugh. So what? It would have been fine as long as I never found out. Her jaw tightened. That's not what I meant. I turned fully to face her, the streetlights casting long shadows between us. You know what the worst part is? If I hadn't heard you that night, I probably would have stayed. I would have kept trying. Because that's who I was. That's who you counted on me to be. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the hem of her jacket. I don't know what you want me to say. I stared at her, feeling an eerie calm settle over me. I don't want you to say anything, Corliss. I just want you to understand one thing. She held my gaze, waiting. I stepped closer, just enough for her to feel the weight of my words. You lost me. And not because I stopped loving you, but because I finally saw you for who you really are. Her breath hitched, and for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. Not regret, not sadness, but fear. Not because she loved me, not because she wanted me back, because she realized she no longer had control over me. I didn't wait for her response. I turned, got in my car, and drove away. And this time, she didn't follow. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No texts. No calls. Nothing. And that should have been a relief. But instead, it left me with a gnawing feeling in my gut, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew Corliss. She wasn't the type to let go easily, not when things weren't on her terms. I kept waiting for the explosion. And sure enough, it came. On the fourth day, my phone rang. It wasn't Corliss. It was her sister, Meredith. I hesitated before answering. Hello. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. Eldric, what the hell is going on? I sighed. Meredith, I really don't. She's been calling me nonstop, freaking out, she cut in. She told me you just left. No warning, no explanation. I let out a dry laugh. Did she also tell you why? Meredith was silent for a moment. She said you misunderstood something. Of course she did, I muttered. Meredith exhaled. Eldric, listen, I'm not taking sides here, but I think you should at least talk to her. You've been married for years, you can't just Meredith, I interrupted, my voice firm. Would you stay married to someone who said they couldn't stand being around you? Another pause. A long one. She said that. I closed my eyes. Yeah, she said that. Meredith cursed under her breath. Damn it, Corliss. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, rubbing my temple. Look, I appreciate you reaching out, but there's nothing left to say. I'm done. She sighed. Okay. Just be careful, all right? That made me pause. What do you mean? Meredith hesitated. I don't know. Corliss has always been the type to get what she wants. And when she doesn't handle it well. I frowned. You think she's going to do something? I don't know. But if I were you, I'd be prepared for whatever comes next. I thanked her and hung up, a deep unease settling in my stomach. Because she was right. Corliss wasn't the type to let go quietly. And something told me this wasn't over yet. It started small. My credit card got declined at the gas station. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, but when I checked my account, I saw that my joint bank account with Corliss had been emptied. Next came the texts. You made this harder than it needed to be. Then, you should have just stayed. Then, I always get what I want. I exhaled, my grip tightening on my phone. I had underestimated her. I thought she'd sulk, maybe badmouth me to her friends. But this was a warning. I wasn't dealing with a heartbroken wife. I was dealing with someone who had lost control and was trying to get it back. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't the same man I had been before. And she had just made her biggest mistake yet. I sat in my car, staring at my phone screen. The words were there, plain as day. You should have just stayed. I always get what I want. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was realization. She wasn't just bitter. I was her loss of control. I always thought I understood Corliss. I knew she had a manipulative streak, sure. She could be cold, calculated, always knew how to twist words to make herself the victim. But this was different. This was her trying to punish me. She was no longer just the woman I had once loved. She was now someone trying to destroy me because I left before she could. I tightened my grip on my phone, forcing myself to take a deep breath. All right, Eldric. Think. I opened my banking app again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Nope. All our joint accounts? Completely emptied. The only money I had was what I had moved to my personal account before I left. Thankfully, I had been smart enough to have that safety net. But it didn't make me any less furious. She knew what she was doing. She knew this was the one way she could still affect me. I didn't respond to her message. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I made 2 calls. First, my bank, to officially remove her from everything I had left. Second, a lawyer. I wasn't playing her games. I was going to end them. The meeting with the lawyer was straightforward. Divorce papers were filed immediately. I made it clear that I wanted nothing from her, not the house, not the furniture, not a damn cent of the money she stole. She could rot with it. The lawyer, an older man with sharp eyes, studied me for a long moment. You're handling this a lot calmer than most men I've seen in your position. I let out a humorless chuckle. I think I mourned this marriage before I even left. He nodded, tapping his pen against the desk. Still, something tells me she's not going to go quietly. I smirked. I'm counting on it. Because at this point, I knew Corliss better than she knew herself. And she was about to make mistakes. Big ones. It didn't take long. 2 days after I filed, I got a call from my lawyer. You're not going to believe this, he said, sounding almost impressed. She's contesting the divorce. I blinked. What? She claims you abandoned her. She's demanding spousal support. I actually laughed out loud. Spousal support? She took all my money. She's not saying that part, of course. I ran a hand down my face. Let me guess. She's playing the victim? 100%, he confirmed. She's painting a picture that you just up and vanished, leaving her financially vulnerable. I exhaled slowly, a slow anger burning in my chest. This was exactly the kind of stun I expected. Corliss was smart, but she was also arrogant. She thought she could spin this into a sob story. What she didn't realize, I had proof. I spent the next few days gathering everything. Text messages, bank statements, call logs. And then I remembered something even better. The security cameras. I had installed them a year ago after a break-in down the street. They were still connected to my account, which meant I had footage of the night I left. I pulled up the files, watching as my past self calmly walked out with a bag. No yelling, no argument, just me leaving. And then, an hour later, Corliss on the phone, laughing about how she finally got what she wanted. I didn't even need to hear the words to know what she was saying. The body language, the smug little smirk, it was all there. I sent everything to my lawyer. His response, "This is better than I could have hoped for. She's about to regret this." The court hearing came faster than expected. Corliss walked in wearing her best poor abandoned wife expression, dressed in a modest navy blue dress, her hair styled just enough to look like she wasn't trying too hard. I almost laughed. She was playing her role perfectly. The moment she took the stand, she launched into her story. How I had left without warning. How she was heartbroken. How she had no idea what she had done wrong. And then, my lawyer played the footage. The room fell silent. There she was, just hours after I left, laughing, talking on the phone, completely unbothered, her arms crossed like she was pleased with herself. Her face went pale. "You want to explain that, Corliss?" my lawyer asked, his voice calm. She stammered, shaking her head. That's taken out of context." The judge didn't look convinced. Then, my lawyer presented the bank records, the messages, the proof. And just like that, her little performance fell apart. By the end of the hearing, the judge denied her request for spousal support. And the best part? She was ordered to return half of the money she had taken from our accounts. Her face was priceless. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood, straightened my tie, and walked out of that courtroom free. For the first time in years, Corliss no longer had control. And she knew it. I walked out of that courtroom, but I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Winning a battle against Corliss didn't mean the war was over. I knew her well enough to understand that she wasn't just going to walk away quietly. She didn't care about me. She didn't care about our marriage. What she cared about was control, and for the first time since I met her, she had none. I got into my car and just sat there for a moment, staring at my hands gripping the wheel. The memories of the past few weeks crashed over me all at once. The night I left, the empty bank accounts, the smug way she had texted me, like she had already won. And now she was the one sitting in that courtroom, humiliated, forced to return what she stole. I should have felt victorious. But instead, I just felt tired. I let out a slow breath and pulled out my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Good. I wasn't naive enough to think she was done, but at least, for the moment, she was quiet. I started my car and drove. Not to the motel I had been staying at. Not to the office where I had been distracting myself with work. Somewhere else. It took me nearly 2 hours to get there. A small lake just outside the city. One of those quiet places you don't think about until you need to disappear for a while. I had taken Corliss here once, years ago, before we were married. Back then, she had acted like she loved it, like she appreciated the stillness. But now, standing at the edge of the water, I realized she had only pretended to. Just like she had pretended with so many things in our marriage. I sat down on the worn wooden dock, letting the breeze wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for her next move. I wasn't bracing for the next blow. And that's when I knew. I was free. Not just legally, not just financially, but in every way that mattered. The next day, I put in my resignation at work. The company had been good to me, but every street in that city, every coffee shop, every grocery store, it all reminded me of her, of us. And I didn't want to live my life in the aftermath of someone else's choices. So I did what she never expected. I started over. Moving wasn't easy. Packing up the pieces of my old life, figuring out what was worth keeping, what needed to be left behind. But the thing about hitting rock bottom? It gives you clarity. I found a new job in a different city. A smaller apartment, just enough space for me and my thoughts. For the first time in years, there was no tension in my chest when I woke up. No waiting for the other shoe to drop. No Corliss. She didn't reach out. Not once. And that should have been a good thing. But I knew better. Corliss wasn't the type to disappear completely. She was just waiting. I found out how right I was 2 months later. It started with a call from Meredith. I almost didn't answer. I had been doing so well at cutting out everything connected to my old life, but something told me to pick up. Eldric, she sighed into the phone. You need to see this. I frowned. See what? She sent me a link. A social media post. And when I opened it, my stomach twisted. Corliss was engaged. I stared at the screen, my brain struggling to catch up. Her smiling face, standing next to some guy I didn't recognize, showing off a diamond ring. The caption? Sometimes, you have to let go of the past to find your true happiness. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. So this was her next move. Meredith's voice pulled me back. I know you don't care, but something feels off about this. I rubbed a hand down my face. Of course something feels off. She was just trying to squeeze money out of me in court. Now, suddenly, she's in love? Meredith hesitated. That's not the weird part. I frowned. Then what is? She sighed. The guy? His name's Brennan. And I know him. My grip on the phone tightened. How? Because, she said slowly, he's been in the picture a lot longer than you think. I didn't respond right away. My thoughts were moving too fast, trying to put the pieces together. I had always suspected there was someone else, even before I overheard her that night. The distance between us, the late nights, the way she looked at her phone like it held more interest than I ever did. But now, hearing it confirmed, it hit differently. Meredith cleared her throat. I don't know for sure, but I think she was seeing him before you left. I exhaled sharply. Of course she was. Corliss had been planning this long before I ever walked away. The reason she wasn't panicked when I left, the reason she didn't really fight for the marriage, the reason she only tried to drain me financially instead of emotionally, she already had a backup plan. I should have been angry. I should have felt betrayed. But all I felt was exhaustion. This was who she was. And the best part? She thought this was going to hurt me. I smiled to myself, shaking my head. Meredith hesitated. You okay? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Better than ever. And I meant it. Because Corliss could spin whatever story she wanted. She could post pictures with her new fiancé, pretend like she had found happiness, play the part of a woman who had moved on. But the truth? I was the one who was finally free. And she knew it. I put down the phone, staring at the screen for a long moment. Meredith had been right. Corliss wasn't the type to disappear. She was the type to rewrite the narrative, to make sure that even in losing, she still came out on top. And in her mind, this engagement was the perfect way to do it. A final statement to the world that she had moved on, that she had one. But I knew better. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Did it even matter anymore? No, it didn't. Because I was done living in her shadow. In the months that followed, something strange happened. I stopped checking my phone, waiting for the next inevitable disaster. I stopped looking over my shoulder, expecting Corliss to come crashing back into my life. I let go. And when I let go, something even more unexpected happened. I started living again. I got promoted at work, not because I was working harder, but because I actually had the energy to care again. Without the weight of a failing marriage pressing down on me, I rediscovered the things I used to love. Hiking. Writing. I even signed up for a cooking class, something Corliss had always laughed at me for wanting to do. I made new friends. Real friends. People who didn't know me as Corliss's husband, but just as Eldric. And one night, while sitting in a quiet coffee shop, flipping through a book I'd been meaning to read for years, I met someone. It wasn't a grand moment. No instant fireworks, no dramatic gestures. Just a woman named Livia who asked if she could borrow the sugar from my table. We talked. And then we kept talking. And then, weeks later, we laughed over dinner about how we had both been in the same cooking class and hadn't even noticed each other. And then, months later, she asked about my past. I told her the truth, not in bitterness, not in anger, but simply as a fact. And she didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She just nodded and said, "Sounds like she did you a favor." I laughed. Because for the first time, I truly believed it. Corliss had thought she was breaking me, that I would crawl back, or that I would crumble under the weight of everything she had done. But instead, she set me free. One day, out of curiosity, I checked her profile. The engagement? Over. The pictures? Deleted. Brennan, her so-called perfect future, had disappeared just as quickly as he arrived. She had bet everything on the idea that she would land on her feet, that no matter what, she would always have someone to catch her. But this time, she had miscalculated. And I was too busy living my life to care. One morning, as I made breakfast, my phone buzzed with a new message. I didn't even have to check the name. Corliss, can we talk? I smiled to myself, set the phone down, and turned back to the stove. Let her wonder. I had nothing left to say. And just like that, I was finally free.